everybody, I'm Nicole.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Sarah, and together we're the co-founders of Whale Tales, a living library of cetacean stories.
And this is Killer Whale Month, or Orca Action Month, or Orca Awareness Month. It's time to talk about killer whales. Woohoo! And so we have a very special guest for this month.
Oh, so sit back and enjoy as we dive right in. So, today we talked to Nancy Black from the California Killer Whale Project, and it was amazing. Mm-hmm. So, a little bit about Nancy. She graduated with her master's in science from Moss Landing Marine Laboratory and studied Pacific white-sided dolphins. And then, since then, she's been doing a lifelong sort of project of researching killer whales, especially off of Monterey Bay, which is where she lives. She owns Monterey Bay Whale Watch. And she is the president of the nonprofit California Killer Whale Project. So she's been studying killer whales off of California for 35 years. And she's also worked with NOAA doing research in Alaska and with another organization doing research in the Bahamas. It's amazing. She was delightful to talk to. And yeah, you're going to love it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We talk to her all about California killer whales, which kind of makes me think of like a band.
Yeah.
Like California killer whales. The many different ecotypes that they see in California. Mm-hmm. It is a lot.
Like most of them?
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
In this ocean side.
And continues to challenge how we define ecotypes and species. Mm-hmm. We also talked about the research that they do and some of the very cool hunts that they've seen. Plus, all the other amazing animals they see in Monterey, because Monterey is the best place in the world.
Let's just go right now.
And let's just go to Monterey.
Yeah. Let's just
pause the podcast.
That's just the podcast. So let's go to Monterey.
Much.
Yes. It was a great conversation. We learned so many things, and so let's get to it. Now we're here with Nancy from the California Killer Whale Project, which is very exciting because we're going to learn about California killer whales. And I don't know a lot about them specifically, so excited to learn. So hi, Nancy. Thank you for being here. And you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you do down there in Monterey.
Okay, thank you for having me. My name is Nancy Black, and I've been studying the killer whales here off California and mostly in Monterey Bay for the last 30 plus years. And I also run a whale watching business, Monterey Bay Whale Watch, which provides us an opportunistic way to get out and see the killer whales because they're unpredictable here. So you kind of have to all the time. You're going to see them.
Yeah. That sounds
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. 35 years. Good job.
Yeah, long time.
That's great. Amazing. So maybe let's start off then with talking about the California Killer Whale Project. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the project, why it exists, and how it got started?
Okay. Well, myself and Elisa Schulman-Janiger started it many years ago, and we became an official 501c3 several years ago. We started it because when I first started here, there was really nothing known about the killer whales off California. In fact, when I went to graduate school at Moss Landing Marine Labs, which is in this area, Monterey Bay, I didn't even know there were killer whales, off our coast here. I mean, that's how few information there was. So I started, collecting photos. Elisa was down south off Los Angeles, and she started collecting photos. When she saw killer whales, we were both really interested in them. And then we just happened to be at the same conference, the Marine Mammal Conference, which was held in Monterey in the mid 80s. And she saw that I was looking at slides of killer whales. Back then, we were still using film, slides. And she says, "Oh, I recognize that one." And then, we kind of got together there and have been working together ever since. And then now there's, other people involved as well that are really interested to help. But that's how we first started. And, she kind of keeps track of the whales down in Southern California. And, I'm up here too, keep track of the ones in this area, Central and Northern California. And then we, get together periodically. We talk all the time. And then there's other people. Colleen Talty also is involved here. And we have other volunteers as well.
That sounds incredible. Let's just all study killer whales in all different places of the world and just live a peaceful, idyllic, and research partnered
Real
life.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. What sorts of research have you been a part of with the killer whales in your area?
Well, of course, we do photo ID. That's the main, basic part of the study of killer whales. We have them all identified over the years. It'd be very unusual for us to get new whales, but it does happen once in a while, especially down south, like off the Channel Islands. Maybe we might get a new one, but not very often. So, and we also keep track of the calves, mortality of calves, because unfortunately their calf survival rate is not that high. So we want to, see how that's going. I've also done biopsy darting of skin and blubber in the past. And I've, many years ago that the killer whales off California have the highest, at the time, had the highest chemical contaminants, of any whales, because this was measured at the time. Now there's many other killer whale populations we know about that are also very high. I mean, all killer whales are high in these PCBs, DDTs, flame retardants, but the ones off California at the time was the early 2000s when I did it, were really high. Unfortunately, some of those chemicals were dumped off Southern California and they do not degrade. I mean, they stay there for thousands of years, unfortunately, and they continue to go through the food chain. So that is still, a problem, especially if the killer whales become skinny or have trouble with other things, and they can start, metabolizing those chemicals. So I've also, we did a lot of that. And then with the skin, we looked at genetics. Of course, we sent that to, other people that study genetics like Russ Hosell and that Marine Mammal Lab in Seattle. And then there were some papers written on that. We're probably going to do some of the sampling again to see how it's changed over, in like 20 years, because we still have some of the same animals that we could resample and look at that. We've also done some eDNA studies that, just scooping up a little bit of skin in the fluke print of the killer whales here. We were doing that recently. And, working with other people quite a bit to see where the killer whales we see here, where they go. So, we work with people in Washington and Oregon and British Columbia and even Alaska. I used to work on some NOAA ships in Southeast Alaska with Marilyn Dahlheim, like in the 90s, early 2000s. And a few of our whales matched to Southeast Alaska. So she was really interested in that. So we looked at all the other whales. And since then, there's only been that one group of killer whales that were seen off California that matched to Southeast Alaska. So that's for the transients, at least, for the bigs transients. The other types of killer whales I can talk about too, they also have matched in Alaska. So we work with, people all up and down the coast so we can look at, what the movements are of these animals and where they range to.
That's super cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know because you guys sometimes get the southern residents, right? Every once in a while, at least in Monterey, right? Yeah.
In fact, I was the first one to see them here in the year 2000. I was out on a whale watch trip. In fact, I started my whale watch company as a way to continue my killer whale research project.
Perfect. Love that.
Paid job to go study killer whales and when they show up, randomly. So I started the whale watch as a way to be out on the ocean a lot so I could, see when the killer whales are here. Because otherwise, you have no idea when they're going to show up. They could be here any time of year. They're just unpredictable. So that's why I started the company so I could be out here and see them. And one day in January of the year 2000, I saw these whales out there and I'm like, these are not our transient whales. I'm like, oh my God, they reminded me of resident type whales like I saw in Alaska, because I was working in Alaska where they have, both resident type fish eaters and the mammal hunters, the transients up there. To me, they looked like resident type whales, but I was not familiar with the southern residents because I hadn't, known them individually or spent much time up in Washington. But I knew they were definitely whales that we had never seen before since I had, been working here. So I got home and I sent a few pictures to Dave Illifrit. At the time, that was hard to do because there was no digital photos, it was all slides. So somehow we were able to take a picture or something and get him a copy right away. And he confirmed that they were the southern residents. I also had looked in the catalog, that Ken Balcom had. These look like, some of K&L pod. I'm like, could it really be? And I was like, I can't even, believe this could be true because we never thought they would come down this far. And then it was confirmed, and it was like big news at the time that people up and watching were worried, are their killer whales going to come down here permanently now? If they left but since then, we've seen them just about 10 times or so. So not very often. I mean, we don't see them every year in Monterey Bay, but they seem to come every year, at least as far as Northern California, Oregon, Northern California, they're often seen. And then once in a while, we still see them in Monterey Bay, like every few years. So like January, February, March time of year. And, every time we see them, we're always excited and hoping, that they're getting enough salmon here because, we also don't have a huge number of salmon in our area, but we do have, a population of Chinook salmon here. So, they come down here. I'm sure the reason they started to come down here is they're looking for salmon in other areas that's further away from their home range, since salmon is hard to find anywhere really, especially where they normally live up in Washington.
Yeah, that's super cool. I know because every once in a while, especially in the winter, and I feel like it's mostly L-pod that just randomly show up down there, and we're like, well, that's where they are. We haven't seen them in
K and L-pod sometimes, part of our subgroup of L-pod as well. But they seem to, come down the West Coast every winter. Ken Balcom, I was, friends with him for many years, and he would always come down here and visit us and put his flyers up all up and down the coast to put winter, have you seen any killer whales or an eye out for these southern residents? And then he would come out on the boat with me and, he was always looking for them, but he had never seen them, in person down here. And there was one time, I think it was, I don't remember which year it was, but like maybe now it's been 15 years ago that he came on our whale watch, and sure enough, we saw.
Oh, really?
And I was very excited because he was hoping to see him, but the chances are very slim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Day because we just don't see them that often. We might see them 2 days in a row when they're here, but they really don't seem to stay around in one spot. So I was very excited. He was on our boat and he actually saw the southern residents, and he was really thrilled about that too.
What an incredible experience, not just for you and for Ken, but for every other passenger you had on your boat that day.
Oh, yeah.
Would you
like not only are we seeing
this
like very extremely rare sighting in these waters, but hey, do you know who this guy is?
Yes, that was really exciting.
That's so cool. So let's talk about who you do see more often. So they've marine mammal eating killer whales, so also known as Biggs transients, but that gets confusing because they don't really come up here and ours don't necessarily go down there. And so they're all named the same thing, but they're different populations of Biggs. And then I know Southern California, we can also talk about, it's kind of the same, but they also get some other ones coming north. So do you want to give us a rundown on what kind of killer whales you see and how they're classified?
Oh, okay. Yeah, several different ecotypes, if that's what you...
Yeah.
So, we see we see the Biggs transient type of killer whale. And we call them CA numbers instead of T numbers because they're, kind of seen off our area. But actually, all of our California whales, the C numbers, have been seen, pretty much all of them have been seen off British Columbia or Washington one time or sometimes several times, especially on the west coast of Vancouver Island, like Tofino area, and also the Queen Charlotte Islands. A lot of our whales, like over 70%, have been seen off the Queen Charlotte Islands. So that's almost southeast Alaska. So they are going up there quite often, whereas it's not so much the other way around, like the transients, the T whales that are seen off British Columbia and Washington, at least the ones they see more closer to shore or inland waters, do not come down our way very often. So it's kind of the opposite, which is very interesting. However, once in a while, over the last several years, 10 years, we've had maybe 3 or 4 sightings of T whales in Monterey Bay, whales that we don't see here very often, like they've just been seen one time, and they are known up in British Columbia. They're not common whales up there, but they do have T numbers. So that's happened just a few times, but not common. It's much more often that our whales that we call CA numbers are seen up north. And I always thought that could be because maybe that's when they're mating or breeding because they don't want to mate with related to. And down in California, there's several matrolines that are related, and so maybe they go up north and they mix. When they go up there, they're often seen traveling with British Columbia whales, or whales that are seen up north more, like the T whales. So our CA number whales are swimming with the T whales temporarily. And maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe that's when they're mating. So they're not mating, with any close relatives. That makes the most sense, although we don't have proof. So that's interesting. That is kind of a one-way travel. And so those are the transients. They also range as far as Southern California, as far as San Diego, and barely into Mexico. And that's as far south as we've ever seen the transient type whales. And then the farthest north has been this one group that has been in Southeast Alaska. But very common to see them off the Queen Charlotte Islands. And then we also see offshore type of killer whale, which is they specialize on sharks. They feed on a variety of different types of sharks. We had them here feeding on a 7-gill shark and a blue shark we've seen. They seem to specialize in that, and they look, kind of marked up. Their teeth, when they strand, are often really worn down, and that's probably because the skin of the shark is so rough and it wears down their teeth. So where it's transient type whales, you don't see that from their teeth. It's very different. And they are often found in large groups, like 50 to 100 we've seen. See the offshore types, but they're very spread out, sometimes over a couple of miles. So it's very hard to identify the entire group when we see them. It's like you're probably just getting a portion of them. But we've been collecting photos of them for, almost 20 years now since we first saw them. And we work with Graham Ellis and John Ford and Jared Towers up north, because they also see the offshore type up there. And that's where they were first named. They were outer waters of British Columbia rather than the inland waters. So that's how they got their name offshore. But when we see them here, and I think up there as well, they're not really offshore. Like, they may go further offshore, but when we see them here, they're just, up right near the canyon edge, which in Monterey is just a few miles from shore. So they're not really offshore in our area, at least, but I'm sure that they may do that. They could be seen farther out. However, what's interesting is further out from Monterey, there seems to be another type of transient or mammal hunting type of killer whale that doesn't mix with our near shore killer whales. When I say near shore here in Monterey, I mean like associated with the canyon, the drop off, like the shelf break, which in Monterey is just a few miles from shore. But that shelf break off San Francisco is about 25 miles from shore. So that's because, it's mostly the water depth that they're related to, not so far the distance, because Monterey Bay is unique because we have a submarine canyon here. So there's deep water very close to shore. It's the largest and deepest submarine canyon on the West Coast, and the only one that comes in so close to shore. So that's why we have such a success here in studying the killer whales, is because even though they're associated often with the deeper water and the shelf break, which is about 600 feet of water as a shelf break, it's so close here that we have, within a few miles, we can get to that depth of water, and we see them more often. Of course, it's a area where there's lots of boats, there's lots of whale watching, so we get lots of reports from other people. But the type of killer whale that's found like 70 miles or more, 70 to 100 miles offshore, is another type of transient or mammal hunting killer whale. I have seen them a few times from the air when I did aerial surveys for Cascadia Research off Half Moon Bay back in the ATOC days in the 2000s. We were flying to a seamount that was 70 miles offshore. And on 3 occasions, we saw killer whales flanking and attacking groups of sperm whales, like the mom sperm whale. In fact, one time the sperm whales were all facing the same direction, and the calves were kind of in the middle of the group, and there was a killer whale on each side and in the front and in the back of them as the sperm whales were traveling. But unfortunately, we were in an airplane doing aerial surveys, so we didn't have much time to observe. It was kind of frustrating because we couldn't just stay there for very long. But another time, we saw the sperm whales in that rosette formation with their heads all pointed in the middle, and the killer whales were surrounding them there too. We didn't actually see, an attack, but they were definitely chasing them and, pursuing them. And but the sperm whales are kind of unpredictable out there. They move around a lot because the following year, NOAA actually went out there to try to do a sperm whale study and they didn't see any. And we had seen many sperm whales the previous year were out there. So the sperm whales probably shift their ranges a little bit depending on the food. They're not as predictable. But these other type of killer whales, they're very hard to see. Like, it would be very hard for us to drive on a day trip 70 miles out, 100 miles out. We would need like a bigger trip or something. But I would love to do that. I'm very curious to, get a chance to see these other type of transients that are out there. There was another time when Bob Pittman saw them off Morro Bay. Again, he was about 70 miles out and he was on a ship and they saw them attacking sperm whales, many different sperm whales. And that was photographed. We saw the pictures of the killer whales. They didn't match any of our coastal transients. They have like cookie cutter shark bites on them, like little round black dots in their saddle patch. So, which our local transients, don't have that. So anyway, they were very different whales. We just don't have many observations or many photos of these outer coast, far, offshore type of killer whales, but it's probably a whole different ecotype or just definitely a different population of transient mammal hunters than the ones we have near shore. So I think that's really interesting. I'd love to learn more about those. And then there's another type. So there's many different ecotypes off California. Very interesting. None of them interbreed. They don't intermix. Their behaviors are different. Genetics are different for the ones that have been seen. So it's really, and they cover, some overlapping range. But there's one group called the ETPs, which stands for Eastern Tropical Pacific. And those have shown up in California recently, not up in Monterey yet, but Southern California. And they are seen most often in Mexico. So they've been identified in Mexico, like even into the Sea of Cortez. And they've come up to Southern California in the last recent years, like in the last 5 years. And sometimes when they come up, they've stayed for maybe a week or a couple weeks or so. And people have really amazing photos of them attacking dolphins, like bottlenose dolphins, common dolphins, where they actually, they come up from below the dolphin and knock them in the air with their head. The killer whale's head knocks them and they come dolphins flying out of the water. And that's one way they catch them by surprise. So,
it's so funny, because obviously we have been really, really lucky to see Biggs hunt porpoise up here in British Columbia. But we're talking about a harbor porpoise, which is so much smaller than a bottlenose dolphin. I just can't visually picture the difference between orcas, who are the same size approximately between those two ecotypes.
Oh yeah,
versus similar. What it was like when they, hammer-headed a porpoise out of the water versus a bottlenose.
Yeah. So have you seen photos of that? It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we've had some really amazing stories from the ETPs visiting, I think 2-3 years ago. Yeah, with some incredible photos of just dolphin, basically rostrum to rostrum, because the dolphin is getting flipped. Yeah.
So that's so the ETPs probably are also several different ecotypes. It's just a name for the the area, the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So some of these killer whales are clumped in this ETP name that can be found like offshore of Mexico or Costa Rica or, in the Sea of Cortez. It's just a location like Central America and Mexico. But I bet you there's, some different ecotypes in there as well.
I'm sure there is.
It's not as known. And then, so those are, several different ecotypes. Also, there was one that we called the LA pod, which is a mystery group of whales that we don't see any. I think they're no longer existing, unfortunately, but Elisa down in Los Angeles used to see them most often in LA, but they did come up to Monterey Bay, and they're in the 90s. Those were the first killer whales I ever saw in the wild.
Really?
These, quote, LA pod whales. They look like dwarf whales or smaller, not transient or mammal hunters. They look smaller and like marked up a lot. There was about 13 of them, and they weren't always all together. They never had a calf. We saw them, she saw them the most in the 80s, and then I saw them in Monterey Bay in the 90s. The last time they were ever seen was 1997. They came to Monterey Bay. They swam right off the Monterey Bay Aquarium near shore. That was it. They disappeared. We never saw them. But before that, we were seeing them pretty often. Elisa would see them every year in Los Angeles, and then I saw them for a few years in Monterey Bay. But they are also famous because they are the group of killer whales that were seen at the Farallon Islands attacking a great white shark for the first before they saw the attacks of sharks in South Africa. But they saw killer whales and documented them feeding on white sharks in South Africa. This was in 1997 also. They were seen off the Farallon Islands killing a great white shark. And everybody often wondered, like, who's the top predator, a white shark or, a killer whale? And obviously it's the killer whale because they do eat sharks. So these LA pod, that they were called the LA pod because they were seen so often off LA, but they were probably similar to those offshore type whales, whether they were different population from the offshores that we see here, maybe like a Mexico type offshore, because they fed on sharks and they looked really marked up, probably from the sharks. So they're very mystery type of whale, but unfortunately they probably died out. And, it could be because of chemical contaminants. They weren't successful in ever having a calf. So they were a mystery group. And I didn't get a chance to dart them. I mean, I never did. I had that, which we would have learned genetics that way. I had the darting on the boat with me, but when we saw them in Monterey, we were on a whale watch boat, and you can't do that, on just a regular whale watch boat. I needed to do my research boat, but then they were gone. I never saw them again, so we never did get a genetic sample of them. But there's just shows you there's so much we don't know. It's lot of information, a lot of different whales in the world, that, how many different ecotypes there are. It's amazing. Also, Antarctica has, like 5 different ecotypes. So, but California has at least, 5 or so plus different ecotypes.
Oh. That's crazy. I don't think I realized that, like, I knew you had overlaps and EGPs, but I don't think I realized there were so many. And then, I've never heard of that LA pod, so that's super cool.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow. Do we want to do a quick rundown of some of the other cetaceans that you often see in your area?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's a long list, but maybe we can focus more specifically on Monterey rather than all of California.
Yeah, that would be here all night.
Yeah, no, I mean, Monterey has a really high diversity of, cetaceans and marine mammals and birds. But, primarily humpbacks are the most dominant whale that we see. And when I first started here, there was only about 400 humpbacks in the population off California. The one that they breed in Mexico and they feed in California. They're different than the whales that breed in Hawaii and feed in Alaska. So ours go from California to Mexico. And there was only about 400, like in the mid 80s when I started IDing the humpbacks and assisting Cascadia research. I used to, work with them and take photo IDs of the humpbacks when I was doing my master's, which was actually on Pacific white-sided dolphins in Monterey Bay.
Yay!
Started to see killer whales when I was doing my surveys for my master's. So I was doing the humpback work. Now there's just about 5,000 humpbacks. So just 30 plus years that I've been here, the humpback population has really more than 10 times has increased, which is amazing. Now there's so many humpbacks here. They're doing very well. That's true all over the world. Of course, humpback numbers have gone up worldwide. Like they've increased about 15% a year off Australia, and, off our coast, it's been very significant too. I mean, I did see humpbacks when back then as well, but, obviously now it's a lot more common. And just recently, maybe in the last 10 years or so, we see them year round. Now, every month of the year, go out and see humpback whales. Not as often in the winter, of course, because most of them are in Mexico. But, some of the young whales don't migrate or they don't go down there very long. And, we can still see here. So there's any month we can go out and see humpbacks now. And they're in a contrast, of course, to the gray whales, which we see in the winter migration. December through April, we see gray whales as they're migrating from Alaska to Mexico and then back again. back again to Alaska in the spring. So unfortunately, the gray whales are not doing well now. You probably have heard, the whales was up to almost like 27,000, which was really good for the killer whales because that's a whole other subject I can talk about. Monterey Bay, we did see quite a few predations on gray whale calves in the spring, more so here than any other area because the killer whales have an advantage of hunting the gray whale calves over the canyon of Monterey than they do other places along the coast. But unfortunately, because of like temperature change or global warming, now the gray whale population is down to about 13,000. It hasn't been that low since like the mid 70s when they were first protected. So it's almost time to have them on the endangered species list again.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that may not happen now, but because of the situation. But anyway, gray whales are another one we see. And then so humpbacks year round. Of course, the prime time for humpbacks is spring through fall. And then blue whales are possible. Of course, they're not as predictable. They feed only on krill. We do have krill here this year. We haven't had krill as much in recent years. We've had more fish. Humpbacks feed on both fish and krill. So anchovies is primarily their food. But this year there's been some krill, so we've had a couple blue whale sightings already. In the past, so things have changed. Like, since I've been here so long, I see the patterns of how things have changed. Blue whales used to be here like clockwork after mid-July because there was so much more krill here back in the 80s and 90s. And then after that, it kind of changed to more anchovies. So that was good for the humpbacks. And then the blue whales started, feeding other places like offshore, sometimes down south. But we do still see blue whales on years when the krill is good, like this year. And, it just depends. They're unpredictable when they're going to be here, usually like later summer and fall. But we still see them every year. Some years definitely more than others. Fin whales, also the second largest whale. We've seen quite a few fin whale sightings this year, again, because there's been krill here lately in the bay. And then minke whales are possible. We've seen killer whales hunt minke whales here also, besides the gray whale calves. And some of the dolphins, of course, we have Pacific white-sided dolphins. Risso's dolphins are the most frequently type of dolphin here now. When I was doing my thesis, it was white-sided dolphins, which is a colder water type of dolphin. We still see them right now, though. But Risso's dolphins are a little bit more warmer water associated, but so we see those more often. And we also see northern right whale dolphins, which are, the finless dolphin that are real beautiful. Cool. And those three dolphins often travel together. Sometimes, like lately in the last month or so, we've seen huge groups of the northern right whale dolphin. One day I estimated like 5,000.
Oh my God. Wow.
Huge numbers. They're over the canyon, over deep water. So there must be a lot of like different squid or, they like to feed on, because Risso's dolphins feed only on squid, but the other two eat both fish and squid. But I mean, there's been thousands of dolphins here this year. It's been pretty amazing. Each type can be seen in several thousands. That's not the norm. Several hundreds are normal, but several thousands have been this year. And then we also see when the water's a little warmer, the common dolphins. Used to be called the short and long beak. Now they've kind of lumped them together. But there's a big difference between short dolphins that have short beak common dolphins versus a long beak. You can see it. So I still, associate the difference there. We see both those types. Also, bottlenose dolphins are found near shore here. And then the porpoise, we see both Dall's porpoise and harbor porpoise. And some years we see beaked whales, like years we see Baird's beaked whales more often than other years, and Cuvier's beaked whales. Sperm whales, very rare to see a sperm whale. You have to, again, like I said, you have to go out a lot further offshore to get to see sperms. So those are the main animals that we see as far as whales and dolphins.
It's so funny, Nancy, because Linz and Sarah and I, we've all had the distinct pleasure of going whale watching in Monterey. And it's a place that is very, very special to all of us. It's a place we all wish we could go on a regular basis. But hearing you list all of the species all at once is like this huge reminder of like, oh, right. There's many reasons why we love Monterey, and the marine mammals that you can see are a huge part of that. But listening to them all listed at once, like, right, it's really the best place in the world to go. I mean, I'm sure that there are others, and that many of our listeners who come from lots of other incredible places in the world that also have large cetacean populations will be messaging us, and that's okay.
Well, you never see that all in one day.
No,
of course.
But still,
you have to go a lot to see that. But this is also a special, not so good for the gray whales, but like I mentioned, killer whales do hunt the gray whale calves. And I've worked with quite a few film crews that have filmed, this amazing behavior. Of course, it's sad to see them killing a baby gray whale, but they have to eat. And sometimes many as like almost 50 killer whales gathered around a gray whale calf that they killed. And it really only takes just a few adult female killer whales doing most of the work, even though a group of 20 whales may be there, with several different matrolines. So, the transient or mammal hunters groups we call matrolines, which is different than the residents who are more in distinct pods. So we don't call transient or mammal hunting group pods. They're, labeled with our CA numbers, or up north, the T numbers. But the matrolines, that's how we name the group. So like we have the CA51s or the CA51As. That's how we name a group. And the matroline is the female with her recent offspring. So there could be between like 2 and 7 whales on average in one matroline. And that's how their main group. But when they're feeding on gray whale calves, several of those matrolines gather together quite often and, share in the prey. And a lot of times these matrolines are related, especially in this area, because they were once, together. When an adult female has a female calf and that calf has grown up and starts having her own calves, like either 1 or 2 calves, then she will break off with her mother's group and form her own family and her own matroline. So that's how the groups form. They never get too big. Otherwise, it wouldn't be efficient feeding on like sea lions or seals, because sea lions are the number one prey they eat most of the year. So the groups are smaller, but they gather together temporarily when they're eating larger prey. So, we name the whales similar to they name up in the Northwest, the T numbers. When CA51 that's like one matriarch, when she has a calf, is called CA51A. And when CA51A has a calf, that's CA51A1. And when that one has a calf, CA51A1A. So, it gets quite long. And as the years go on, I'm sure it's going to be really long, like A1, B1, 2, 3.
We have that up here too. And I'm wondering if, who's going to be the person who makes that call? I think we've got I don't remember what's numbers, T137A2A2A or something like that now. And it's like, okay, at some point we're all going to get together and be like, we're going to start from scratch again, maybe? We got to do something.
Yeah, it's not going to be efficient after a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like how far back do you keep the ancestry once we have
now that we
decades and decades of history.
Yeah, and we know them all.
Well, it's going to have to change eventually, I'm sure, because that would be quite expensive down the line.
Indeed.
But, so anyway, I'm kind of a little worried about the gray whale population, but it did provide a lot of food at one time. I mean, some of our matrolines got so good at hunting the gray whale calves that the fastest I've seen it happen is like 15 minutes, which is really fast. Just the first time I witnessed the first time the attack was filmed, that I saw the start to finish, it took 6 hours for them to kill the gray whale. And that was when they were filming the BBC's Blue Planet 1. I don't know if it's Blue Planet 1. They were here in 1998 to film that. And it took 6 hours for the event to happen, for them to kill the calf. Now, I feel like they've gotten better over the years because the gray whale numbers were very low. Unfortunately, they've gotten low again, but the gray whales were very low. They were almost hunted to extinction. They were protected in the early 1970s and then the population of gray whales increased. Well, there was probably a time when the killer whales didn't hunt many gray whale calves because there weren't any of them left. So they probably, they switched to all the other marine mammals. Luckily, there's been, thousands and thousands of pinnipeds, seals and sea lions around. They also were very low at one time too. So I'm sure the killer whale population, has been low at one point and they've increased because of all the marine mammal prey nowadays. But the gray whale thing is changing. I think the killer whales, are wondering, where are these gray whale calves? We had some groups here. One group stayed here almost 3 weeks, and that's this year, and that's never happened before, where a group of transients, one matriline, it was the CA51As that stayed here for almost 3 weeks. We didn't see them every day, but I bet you they were here every day because, we kept seeing them over and over again. And they did kill one gray whale in early April. But we saw that the next day they were holding a piece of gray whale blubber. So we didn't see the attack, but there was evidence. And then I almost felt like they were just waiting for more gray whales to come through, and they never got another one that we knew about. So, there was only the count station. NOAA counts the number of gray whale calves at a station to the south of us by San Simeon. That's like 100 miles or so. And they've only counted 23 gray whale calves this year, which is very low. One of the last few years have been the lowest years. And the high years, there could have been a couple hundred gray whale calves that they counted. And when we saw that happening, like in 2017, there's one group of transients. Her name is Emma. She's the matriarch, and that is the CA140s. She had 7 whales in her family then. That was before her daughter split off, and she's the best gray whale hunter. She's the one that took 15 minutes to take down the gray whale calf. That year in 2017, they killed that particular group, Emma, and she was doing most of the work along with some of her family and sometimes other groups of killer whales mixed with her. But her group was there every single attack, and there was 11 different attacks on gray whale calves over like a month and a half. And we always wondered, how much can they eat? How many more? After they killed one gray whale, then a day later they got another one. And then 3 days later, another one. It's like, how much are you going to eat? And then it wasn't just always them. They were mixed with other transient groups as well. But they were the group that was here for every attack, and they were feeding each time. So they, the best part they go for is the tongue. But if they haven't eaten a lot of gray whales previously, they eat the entire gray whale. They eat the blubber. It's a myth that they only feed on the tongue. That doesn't really happen very much. But it does happen if they've been feeding on lots of gray whales and they just have a choice of part of it, then they might just take the tongue. Of course, that's the part that's easy access, right? That's how they actually get into the whale and start feeding on it, because the mouth is the only thing that's open. So that tongue is hanging out. So that's why it's so easy to start there. But it's not true. People think, they just eat the tongue. But, that's not true. They eat sometimes all the blubber on the whale. But Emma's group got very efficient at feeding on these gray whale calves. So now we wonder, how will this impact the killer whales? Because now there's not as many gray whale calves. It's going to take many years, for the gray whale population to increase, but it may not. Like, they may not recover if they don't get the food in the Arctic because of the warming temperatures. It could really affect them.
Yeah.
Crazy.
We're gonna, I don't know, see what happens.
Big questions in the future.
Minus is about the global warming, because, it's not good for the gray whales, but in the Arctic, unfortunately, the ice is melting, and the gray whales feed on amphipods, which are found in the mud, and those amphipods rely on feeding on the algae that forms under the ice. Well, if there's not ice, then the food for the gray whale doesn't have anything to eat, and that's what's happened. So the gray whales starve, and die, and that's they've been washing up on the beaches, really skinny. However, the killer whales in the Arctic are having a whole new source of food. As the ice is melted, they're coming into areas they never were before to catch belugas and narwhals, and other seals that's, they didn't have access to before. So it's positive for some animals and negative for others.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a big change.
See how things shake out. Okay, so we talked about research with just mainly doing like the photo IDs and stuff. Is there anything else? You're studying eDNA. Do you guys do any anything else with the killer whales down there? I was going to say poop sampling, but that's in Washington. So I don't know if you do any of that.
No.
So it's mainly the like biopsies when you can, collection when you can kind of thing.
Right, biopsies. We've considered satellite tagging, which would be very interesting to do. However, it's very controversial now with the tags on the killer whales. And Jared Towers, who's up your way, is on our scientific a board for our group. So we talk to him all the time. He is very against the satellite tags, putting them on killer whales. So we feel like, oh, maybe we should hold off as well because it's pretty invasive. These big barbs go into the fin of the whale. And a lot of times if you take pictures of the fin afterwards, they look, pretty bad. Like some heal just fine, but others could get infected. They leave big scars or marks. So, people have different opinions on it. There's some research the same tags on Risso's dolphins here in Monterey Bay and haven't had any problems. Other people use it for pilot whales. So it would be really cool to do that, to learn where they go and everything, but we don't want to do anything to harm the killer whales or, have anything happen to them. So maybe I'm hoping in the future they can develop a different type of tag that's not so invasive.
Yeah, I know that's a conversation that a lot of people are having because there's just, especially like southern residents, we don't know where they go. Offshores, we don't know what they're doing up here. Like there's just so many questions that we would love to have answered, but there's just not a way to do it that's good for everybody yet. So just have to keep.
Well, technology is so good. I feel like they can develop hopefully a type of tag eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the suction cup tags are really cool. I'm interested in doing that. We might do that as well, upcoming. You put a camera on the suction cup, stick it onto the whale. So on them, it's not going to their blubber. And it can last, some of those suction cups, last like a whole day, sometimes more than a day. And you could program them apparently to last, for different hours. But I would really be interested to try and do that. So I'm looking into that. See what they're doing underwater, with like if they're gray whale, how they're working together when they're feeding on it, or does the carcass go to the bottom or is it floating just below the surface? And, how many whales, prey sharing. It'd just be really cool to, see some underwater things. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So many more things we can do and learn.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the last question we have is one that we've started to ask our guests because we find it really fascinating to learn more about your career journey and how you got into marine research and also how you got to where you are now with your project and also still doing research. And obviously you have this amazing network of people that you work with. So if you wanted to talk to us a little bit about how you got started in research and marine research at academics, and then just kind of any tips or suggestions you have for people, the young and also old, because we get lots of people who are talking to us about going back into marine research and stuff at a later age. So any suggestions you might have?
Well, I've always loved whales, especially killer whales, since I was a little kid. And, since I'm older, I grew up right near Marine World. So I hate to say it, but, when I was like 10 years old, I went to see the whales there. Now, of course, we know different. But at the time, I loved them. I couldn't wait to work there. So I did at 16. Of course, I was in the gift shop. But from there, I didn't want to be a trainer or anything like that. I was more interested in seeing them in the wild anyway. So I went through college, UC Davis. I did my undergraduate in zoology because I always loved animals. I'm sure I could have been just as happy studying elephants as well in Africa. So I always loved animals and I wanted to do something with animals. And then as I finished college, I volunteered at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. And that's where I got like a real more of a marine focus. Like, I definitely wanted to go to graduate school from my experience at volunteering at the Marine Mammal Center. And also, from my previous interest of just growing up. I did do whale watching when I was a kid for gray whales off the coast because I grew up near San Francisco. So I did go on boats when I was, young as well. And then after UC Davis, I applied to Moss Landing Marine Labs with Dr. Barrett Wersig. And he, at the time, was one of the main professors that studies marine mammals. And so I was accepted there, and I started my master's thesis on Pacific white-sided dolphins in Monterey Bay, as I mentioned. And that's how I started to see killer whales here. And, I mentioned this was like in the mid-'80s. No one knew anything about the killer whales in California at that time. It was just a mystery. It's like, honestly, I didn't even know they were occurred off our coast. I mean, until I saw them and realized, because there was just nothing. Like, it's so different today how everybody knows, where all these whales are and you can see them in the wild. But when I first started, that wasn't true. So anyway, I started, having a real passion for the killer whales in Monterey Bay. And as I mentioned, from that, so I got my master's degree from Moss Landing Marine Labs. And to continue my work with killer whales, I had to think of a way to go out in the ocean a lot, still earn an income. So I started the Whale Watch, Monterey Bay Whale Watch, and that provided me, opportunity to do opportunistic research on the killer whales, photo ID and, things you don't need a permit for, which photo ID is perfect for that. And, looking at behaviors, what they're feeding on. And then eventually we started the California Killer Whale Project, as I get to know Elisa. And then I worked with NOAA in Seattle with Marilyn Dahlheim. I went to Southeast Alaska to do killer whale work with them on the NOAA ship for like almost 15 seasons. And also through the Aleutian Islands, I did NOAA killer whale work there too, which was really exciting. And I learned, how to biopsy dart up there. And I, applied that to the animals here and still kind of worked with NOAA at the time, sent my samples to them. And then we did publications together. So I was involved in several of the publications with NOAA. So, and then eventually, we were more focused on our own research here. I got my own research boat, which is a rib, like a 25-foot hard bottom inflatable that we use to go out and just focus on killer whales. I also use some of the larger boats I have for whale watching when we're not taking passengers out. We use them for looking for killer whales. In fact, a lot of times we get reports of killer whales by, other research boats or other whale watch or fishing boats in the area. And if I'm, I'm not out, I'm actually home and we get a call and I will take one of our boats with other people and we'll dash out there because that's actually the best way when you get a report because, they're unpredictable here. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, so I've done that as part of my research. So that's what happened. I think it's important for people to volunteer. Like we take interns on our whale watch and we take volunteers to help us with data for our nonprofit group. But, going out and volunteering and doing internships is really important. I did a lot of that when I was in college at UC Davis, like any animal internship and veterinary type internship. I did lots of them. But, by doing an internship, you just find out if you really like doing that. We have an internship program for our whale watch trips that we take students from Cal State, Monterey Bay, or, just people, like even older people come as interns with us and they help us do photo ID. They, collect data. So we write down all the species and behaviors and use data sheets on our whale watch to document all the sightings. So I have, 30 years of long-term data for Monterey Bay that we're going to hopefully write up. It's a big task. But yeah, it's great I say the number one thing is getting internships and volunteering places. Like I did that with the Marine Mammal Center, and that really increased my experience and passion. And those people can help you get jobs or, write references for you for a school or another job. And, if you do well. So I would recommend that. That's the main thing I'd say. And from that, you just use it as a stepping stone to get jobs, do the volunteer and internships. I don't expect that you're going to get a paying job starting in whale research, right? Evening. I mean, you have to put your time in. I think everybody does that. You have to volunteer. You have to do things for free and, show passion and interest in that. And then it will pay off in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finding out if you actually like it is, I think, the biggest thing.
But you don't get seasick either.
Yes, you don't get seasick, or you can manage through your seasickness, like Sarah and I. But yeah, that's the biggest one because there's so much. It's so different than what you think it is going to be when you're writing in your diary at 14.
And the day-to-day of a career in research is very different than what you might think it is from the outside. Like the glamorous parts are the small parts, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's good to make sure you know what you're getting into.
You can spend, part of the job or the volunteer work is spending like hours on the boat with binoculars, just searching for whales, like observing. That's how you have to find them. You have to stand there with binoculars for hours and help search. And sometimes you don't see them. That's not the greatest fun part, but you have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes it's cold and sometimes it's raining.
Yep. Pouring rain. You don't just get to go out on the good days. So always great. Nice.
I think that's all the questions that we had for you, Nancy. Was there anything else you wanted to share?
I think they covered it. I think, it would be, I've noticed that there's, still a lot of salmon fishing off our coast and up north too. And I wish, one thing for conservation, if maybe we could pressure the California Fish and Wildlife and fishing organizations in Washington or Oregon, to really close the salmon season so there's more fish available for the southern residents. I just worry about the southern residents. They are starving to death and they're just going downhill all the time. And, something I know Ken Balcom always said, if we don't increase the salmon, they're just not going to make it. They're going to go extinct. So, people think about that part of it, that, we really need to increase the salmon, take down those dams that, they haven't taken down yet. And, in some areas up north so that the salmon have a better habitat. But in fact, California just allowed salmon fishing this year. And I was very disappointed to see that because it's been closed for the last 3 years because our salmon numbers aren't real high, but they have lots of fishermen put pressure, on the Fish and Wildlife to say, please open the salmon season. So they did. They're allowed to catch 20,000 fish for recreational fishermen and 20,000 for commercial together. And when that happens, then it will end. But, the killer whales need all the salmon they can get. Obviously, they're not getting it. So that's
Those
just
numbers are so high. And I understand that when you talk about the total population of salmon, you're talking about millions of fish. But you're right. That's just... It would be interesting, and I can't do this math off the top of my head because I would need to know the tonnage of that many salmon. But when you think about, the total amount that just one killer whale needs to eat a day and then multiply that by how much that means they need to eat in a year, and then what's the population of killer whales? It's just, it's too, you're right, it's too much.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I wish we could do more for the southern residents. And the main thing is to increase the number of salmon available for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was going to be sort of my question that I was going to wrap things up with, but I think this is a great way to sort of transition into the rest of our segments. Yeah, that's our call to action for our listeners, which is always something we like to leave everybody with, is to, get in touch with your representatives and, apply that political pressure in support of the animals that you care about too.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we continue with the rest of the episode, we want to take a moment to tell you about how you can support our podcast and everything we do at Whale Tales.
You can join us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/whaletales. You can join for $1 a month at the porpoise level, $5 a month at the dolphin level, or $10 a month at the whale level.
And each level comes with a variety of perks, like postcards. These are not postcards that you have to write and think of cool, quirky, witty things to say to your friends. We do that for you, and we paint something on it, and then we send it to you. Also, extra interviews, extra stories, extra facts that you get to produce. In the Fun Flipper Fact segment, you get to send me on a wild whale chase, try and find really, really, really random, sporadic information on the internet. It is always a good time. And we do 2 extra podcasts. So once every 2 months, we do Journal Club, where we read a scientific article and then we talk about it and our feelings and thoughts and discuss the research and methodology and all other things that you would associate with reading a journal article and then having a club about it virtually. And that's for our dolphin and whale level patrons. And for the whale only level patrons, on the other months, we do Whale Tales Watches, the best thing in the whole wide world. We watch a thing. We talk about that thing. We discuss how accurate, or, spoiler alert, most often inaccurate that thing was. And then we have a lot of fun doing that. And that's for our whale level patrons. And this month. And this month we have a very special and sentimental, at least to me, Whale Tales watches, where we watched I don't know why it exists, but the video version of beloved children's classic story, The Snail and the Whale.
Yes. And for $7,000 a month, you can hear the outtakes that Nicole just did. They were special. But thank you to all of our patrons. You are amazing, and we're so glad that you're here with us.
Agreed. If you aren't able to support us financially, there are still lots of things you can do to help us out. You can leave us a rating or a review or a comment, possibly, on your podcast platform of choice, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This can help other people find us and join in. You can also just tell people in real life. Like, you don't have to rely on algorithms and software to tell people that you love cetaceans, and so do we. So, yeah, thanks.
Yay! You can also follow us on social media at whaletales_org, and you can send us your feedback at any time in any of the ways that you can get a hold of us so that we can keep making this podcast even better.
All right. Well, Nancy, one of our listeners and certainly my favorite segments of the pod, which I absolutely never, ever, ever forget, is it's time for a fun flipper fact, a fun flipper fact. We want to hear Nancy's fun flipper fact about whatever flipper she wants because there's so many.
Okay, yes, I did see that on your form.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my flipper fact I was thinking about is again with the killer whales, because they are really amazing animals. I mean, they are the most intelligent of all the whales. So of course they have lots of different things we could talk about. But I think one of the interesting things is how there's been a paper recently published, and I had an incident where it happened to me as well, where killer whales are known to pass food to people, like on boats. And that's happened in other places of the world. And it happened to me. And I listed on that paper because I didn't know they were doing it. But I think, killer whales are so intelligent. Why do they, what happened to me was we were in our research boat, and a transient type killer whale actually caught a salmon, for play, which they don't eat salmon. And I've only seen them play with salmon, not very often. But they caught a salmon. One of them swam over to our boat. In fact, it was Emma, CA40. This was like 20 years ago when she was a young, kind of a teenager, dropped the salmon right next to the boat where the people were. And I had my dog hanging his head over to my black lab was right there. And the salmon was just dropped in front of us. And we picked it up and took it into the boat. And that was amazing. And then, I didn't think more about it. It's never happened since. And they published a paper recently, I think Ingrid Visser, Jared, and many other people had an experience when that. So killer whales, have this fact, or they do pass food to people, and whether that's just social, a curious thing, or they want to create an interaction with our species, I'm not sure, but it's because probably they're so intelligent. So that's an interesting fact that they pass food sometimes, like fish, birds, or like rays to people.
Wow. I think I know about the rays, but it's so fascinating. Just when they couldn't get more interesting.
Always
Indeed.
surprising us. Well, thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing that. Plus, of course, so many other fun flipper facts throughout the pod today.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and now I was going to ask you for a story, but you've already told us so many absolutely incredible ones that I just can't even believe. If you have another one that you do want to share that was super memorable for you at any time or anywhere in the world, we would absolutely love to hear it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I have an interesting story that I never expected to see. Risso's dolphins, which we've never seen the local transients, the coastal ones feed on Risso's dolphins. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're kind of similar to a pilot whale. They're up to 12 feet long. They're grayish white. They have a round shaped head. They don't have the long beak, so their head is similar to a pilot whale. And they have a lot of scratch marks on them from the squid they eat. So they are one of the most frequent dolphins we see here because of the deep water here, and also because there's lots of squid here. But there was one day, and this was again about 20 years ago, and it hasn't happened since. But the killer whales here, like I said, have never been seen preying on the Risso's dolphins. We have seen the outer coast transients, the ones that feed on the sperm whales. There's been 2 times that they have been seen close to shore here, and they caught Risso's dolphins twice, but not our transients, the one that eat the sperm whale. So, but the story was that the local transients we were watching, and then all of a sudden this group of about 15 Risso's dolphins came charging over and caused the group of transients to flee. It was like a thing. So these Risso's dolphins were chasing and pursuing this group of like 7 transient mammal hunting killer whales, which you wouldn't expect because you would think the killer whales would be the aggressive mammal hunting whales. And the Rissos chased them for about like 15, 20 minutes, and they were all porpoising, going at a very high rate, swimming out of the water. And eventually the Rissos kind of caught up to them and surrounded them, and then everybody stopped. It's like the Rissos caught them it was like a net because the Rissos surrounded them, and I felt like they put a net around them, which they didn't, obviously. It was like that. They had surrounded them. So the killer whales were like, stopped completely in the water, like breathing, extra. And they were going so fast, it was hard for us to keep up on them on the boat. But they trapped these killer whales in the ocean, by surrounding for maybe 10 minutes or so. And then the killer whales broke loose and started fleeing again. And then a second time, the Rissos caught up and trapped them. And then eventually the killer whales, got away again, and the Rissos gave up. But it's kind of reverse to what you would expect.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't expect a dolphin to be chasing and tracking a killer whale, and the killer whales to be so frightened by them. So that was a really interesting story that I really always remember and think it's pretty cool.
That's fascinating and so cool to see. That's weird.
I wish I had a video camera documenting it, or a drone. Oh, in fact, that's really cool. Nowadays we're using drones for our research. Where, over the last 6, 7 years, everybody is, we're using so much, and we're learning so much more about the killer whales from filming it with the drone from the air. And that's been the biggest change, I'd say, in our research lately, is trying to document a lot with the drone. The killer whales can't even hear it. They don't even notice it. And you can see so much more from the drone that you wouldn't see from the boat. So, that's been a big thing. If we had the drone when that happened, it would have been really cool.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. This has been...
just so amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy. I've learned so much, and now, as always, but especially today, I would like to visit back down to Monterey and see all that you guys get to see. And thank you just so much for sharing your journey and all your experience and research with us and with our listeners.
Well, thank you. And you're welcome to come down with us sometime.
Oh my gosh, as soon as possible.
Yeah, someday. Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Nancy.
And that is a wrap. We would love to hear your thoughts on this or any episode, so please visit our website, whale-tales.org, where you can find links to all of the different social media handles that you can use to get in touch with us, and you can drop us a line.
You can also head to our site to subscribe to the podcast, learn about supporting us and becoming a patron, and check out over 1,600 whale, dolphin, and porpoise stories. Spoiler alert, a large proportion of them are about killer whales.
So, I think almost 1,000.
Yeah. More than half.
Yes, absolutely.
Sure. And that is whale-tales.org, tales like stories, not tales like the animal.
You can find Monterey Bay Whale Watch on Instagram at Monterey_Bay_Whale_Watch. And you can find the California Killer Whale Project also on Instagram, all one word. Monterey Bay Whale Watch is gowhales.com, and the California Killer Whale Project.org is where you will find the California Killer Whale Project.
And if you've seen a cetacean, we would love to add your story to our library. You can click the share link on our website. You can contact us on social media at whaletales_org, or you can just email us a voice memo and tell us all about your incredible cetacean encounter.
Finally, we want to acknowledge that we recorded today's episode on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples and the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Shianu, and Sauk nations.
Thank you all so much, and have a whaley great day.